Get out of this cabin. You are not supposed to be sitting here. Diane Coleman's voice cut across the first-class cabin like a slap, sharp enough that 3 passengers near the galley flinched before they even understood what they were witnessing. In seat 2A, a man in a plain charcoal blazer did not move. His hands stayed folded in his lap, still, almost peaceful, while the flight attendant loomed over him with her arms crossed and her chin lifted like a queen addressing a trespasser. "Ma'am, I have a valid first-class boarding pass," he said quietly. "No, you don't. You're confused, or you're lying. Either way, you need to leave." He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced his ticket, holding it up between 2 fingers, not defensively, just as fact laid on the table. Diane didn't even glance at it. "Put that away. This seat belongs to real passengers." The words landed and stayed in the air the way smoke does in a closed room. You could still smell it minutes later. Every person in that cabin felt the temperature drop, though nothing on the plane had changed except the sound of one woman's certainty. His name was Marcus Boone. He was 46 years old, and in 11 minutes, an airline that had spent 2 years and $11 million trying to rebuild its reputation was about to lose the one man who could actually save it. But to understand how a first-class cabin at Gate B14 in Charlotte Douglas International Airport turned into the loudest silence you've ever heard, we have to rewind 2 hours to a cup of black coffee going cold on a departure lounge table, and a man who had already survived this exact moment 100 times before. Just never at 40,000 feet, and never with quite so much at stake. Charlotte Douglas smelled like burnt espresso and jet fuel. That Tuesday morning, the low gray light of a Carolina winter pressing against the terminal windows. Marcus Boone stood near Gate B14, with a scuffed brown leather satchel over one shoulder, the strap worn pale where his hand had gripped it for 15 years. His watch was a cheap Timex with a cracked leather band, the kind of watch a rich man keeps not because he needs it, but because giving it up would mean forgetting who gave it to him. His father, Wendell Boone, had strapped that watch onto his wrist the morning Marcus graduated from North Carolina A&T. "Time is the one thing nobody can take from you unless you let them," Wendell had said. Marcus had carried that sentence into hotel lobbies, where clerks assumed he needed directions to the loading dock. Into boardrooms where investors addressed the younger white associate standing behind him instead of him. Into department stores where security walked 11 feet behind him for no reason they could name out loud. He had learned to recognize the exact shape suspicion takes before it opens its mouth. At 46, Marcus was the founder and CEO of Bellwood Analytics, a company that had quietly become one of the most trusted names in algorithmic fairness, software that airlines, banks, and hospitals used to catch bias hiding inside their own systems before a lawsuit or a headline found it first. The irony of his current situation would have been almost funny if it weren't about to become so bitter. He checked his phone. A message from his assistant, Renata Cole. "Vantage Air legal team confirms tomorrow's 9 a.m. Board wants your sign-off tonight before final contract release." He typed back a single word, "Understood," and slipped the phone into his pocket, just as the gate agent lifted her microphone. "Now, boarding first class and Summit Circle members for Vantage Air Flight 442 to Denver." A ripple moved through the crowd the way it always does. Shoulders straightening, bags jerking upright, a small performance of importance. 2 people stepped into the priority lane like it had been built specifically for them. Harold Weller was 59, silver-haired, built like a man who had spent 3 decades being agreed with. His wife, Denise, 56, wore a cream wool coat and pearl studs, and had the particular stillness of someone who expected the world to notice her before she had to ask. As they passed Marcus in line, Harold's eyes moved over him. Jacket, shoes, satchel, face. The way a customs officer studies a passport photo that doesn't quite match. He said nothing. He didn't have to. Marcus had read that exact glance in 100 different rooms. The gate agent scanned Marcus's phone. The machine chimed green. "Thank you, Mr. Boone. Seat 2A, enjoy your flight." Behind him, Denise leaned toward her husband. "Did she say 2A?" Harold's jaw tightened. "That's our row." Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin gleamed the way expensive things do when they're trying to convince you they're worth it. Cream leather, brushed steel trim, the low hum of climate control. Marcus stowed his satchel overhead and settled into seat 2A by the window, exhaling slowly. For one quiet moment, the world narrowed down to the click of his seatbelt and the soft glow of his tablet, opening to tomorrow's contract notes. He wanted 2 hours of peace, where nobody asked him to prove what he'd already paid for. Then a shadow fell across his row. Harold Weller stood in the aisle, chest out, the posture of a man discovering an insult rather than a seating mix-up. Denise stopped beside him, her smile already gone. "Excuse me," Harold said. "You're in our seat." Marcus looked up. The cabin noise didn't get quieter. It got heavier, the way air feels right before a storm decides whether it's actually going to break. "Our seat," Marcus repeated without heat. The way it might set a small stone on a table, just to watch who pretends not to see it. "Yes," Harold said. "My wife and I fly this route every other week. 2A and 2B always." Marcus glanced at the empty seat beside him, then at Harold's boarding pass, still folded in his hand. "Your seat is 2C. Denise's face changed, not much, just enough. "That has to be a system error. Harold always sits by the window." "I understand," Marcus said, "but my pass says 2A. He held it out. Harold didn't take it. That refusal told Marcus everything he needed to know. The truth was never the problem. The problem was that accepting it would cost Harold something he had never once had to pay in his life. The price of being told no in public. A businessman 2 rows back lowered his phone slightly, listening without pretending not to. An older woman across the aisle adjusted her glasses. Denise leaned toward Harold and murmured 5 words that would matter more than she knew. "Get someone right now." Diane Coleman appeared from the forward galley almost before the sentence finished, as if she'd been standing by, waiting for a reason to be needed. 29 years old, platinum hair pinned into a flawless twist, a Vantage Air scarf knotted at her throat like a small flag of allegiance. Her smile, when she looked at Harold, was warm and immediate. "Mr. Weller, is everything all right?" The temperature of her voice changed the instant she turned to Marcus. "Sir," she said, "may I see your boarding pass?" He handed it over. She studied it far longer than a boarding pass requires studying, tapped her tablet, frowned, tapped again. "It does say 2A, she admitted, reluctant, as though the ticket itself had personally betrayed her. Then she leaned toward Marcus and lowered her voice, just enough to sound professional, and just loud enough for the entire cabin to hear it anyway. "Sir, the Wellers are Summit Circle members. They've had this arrangement with us for years. I'm sure you understand the importance of accommodating our most loyal travelers." Something cold settled behind Marcus's ribs. Not surprise, recognition. "I'm also a paying customer," he said. "Of course. Nobody's questioning that." But she was. Everyone in that cabin could feel it. The way you can feel a lie, even when you can't name which words carry it. That should have been the whole story. 1 flight attendant. 1 uncomfortable minute. 1 seat sorted out and forgotten by Denver. It wasn't, because Diane Coleman was the kind of person who had spent 6 years at Vantage Air, being praised for handling difficult situations. And what that praise had quietly taught her was that difficult situations were passengers, not policies. She believed, sincerely, that she was protecting the airline's most valuable relationships. That belief was about to cost the airline everything. "There are plenty of other seats," Denise said, arms crossed now. "This really doesn't need to be difficult." "It became difficult," Marcus said, "the moment you asked me to give up the one I paid for." Harold laughed, short and humorless. "It's 1 seat, buddy. Just move." Then sit in yours, Marcus said. The cabin tightened another notch. A young man in row 4 lifted his phone and began recording, thumb trembling slightly against the glass. Diane noticed the camera and her expression sharpened into something colder. "Sir, I need you to lower your tone. My tone hasn't changed." That was true, and it made the accusation land even uglier, because everyone could hear that it was true. Harold stepped closer, crowding the aisle, voice dropping into something meant to sound reasonable and threatening at once. "Look, I don't know what point you're trying to make, but we've flown Vantage for 22 years. Marcus met his eyes, and I've been living with this my whole life." The sentence didn't rise in volume. It just landed, heavier than anything shouted could have been. Denise inhaled sharply. Diane's jaw set. This was no longer about a window view. It never had been. It was about who gets believed first, and who gets asked to prove they belong in a place they already paid to enter. "Sir," Diane said, straightening her spine, "I'm going to ask you one more time to cooperate." "I am cooperating with the terms of my ticket," Marcus said. "I'm seated in 2A, and if the crew decides a seat change is genuinely necessary, I'll need that documented. Your name, your employee number, and the reason, in writing." Diane froze. For the first time, she looked past his face and saw something she should have seen from the very beginning. Not defiance. Documentation. She didn't answer right away. The cabin held its breath around her, the recycled air suddenly feeling thinner, the low mechanical hum of the plane the only sound left. Her eyes flicked to the phone recording in row 4, then to Harold, then back to Marcus. She had expected him to fold the way most passengers folded under a uniform and an audience. Most people didn't want the scene. Most people didn't want their dignity dragged into an aisle before takeoff. Marcus Boone was not most people. He had spent his whole adult life learning the difference between peace and surrender, and he had promised himself silently, at 23 years old in an airport gate, very much like this one, that he would never again choose the second one. "There's no need to escalate this," Diane said. "I'm asking you to write on your own request," Marcus said. "That isn't escalation. That's accountability." The word landed on her like a spotlight switching on. Harold scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Nobody's discriminating against anybody. We just want our usual row." "Then why," Marcus asked quietly, "did your usual row become my problem?" Harold opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The silence answered for him, and silence in a crowded first-class cabin is its own kind of confession. Diane turned and walked briskly toward the forward galley, heels pressing sharp little exclamation points into the carpet. She found Roland Ashby waiting there. Cabin supervisor, 48 years old, the kind of man whose posture had been shaped by a decade in the Air Force before Vantage ever hired him. He listened to Diane's version with his arms crossed, his eyes already narrowing toward row 2, before he'd heard a single word from the man actually sitting there. "Passengers refusing to cooperate," Diane told him. "Summit Circle members displaced. Possible disruption." Roland didn't ask why Marcus's boarding pass showed 2A. He didn't ask whether the Wellers even had assigned seats of their own. He heard refusing and disruption, and something in him relaxed into the shape of a job that suddenly felt simple again. He walked down the aisle like a verdict already reached. "Mr. Boone," Roland said, stopping beside Diane. "I'm the cabin supervisor. I understand we're having an issue." "There's no issue with my ticket," Marcus said. Roland's smile was thin. "That's not what I asked. My crew needs your cooperation so we can push back on schedule." Marcus felt every phone in that cabin pointed at him now, felt the particular trap closing that he had lived inside his entire adult life. If he raised his voice, they would call him aggressive. If he stayed silent, they'd write his silence as guilt. If he stood, threatening. If he stayed seated, non-compliant. So he chose the one weapon they had no name for: precision. "Your crew is asking me to give up a confirmed first-class seat," he said, Not for safety, not for mechanical reasons, not for a medical emergency, for another passenger's preference. Is that correct? Roland blinked. Diane's face tightened. Harold looked away, and for the first time, something in Roland Ashby's 22 years of aviation instincts whispered that the man in seat 2A might not be the problem at all. He did not like that feeling one bit. "Sir," Roland said, voice hardening back into command, "if you continue refusing crew instruction, this becomes a security matter." Diane's shoulders relaxed at the word security. "The oldest shortcut there is. The fastest way to turn your own discomfort into someone else's punishment. So now a confirmed seat becomes a security incident," Marcus said. His hands hadn't moved from the armrests. His voice hadn't risen a single degree. "Your behavior determines that," Roland said. "My behavior," Marcus repeated, and let the phrase sit there long enough for its emptiness to become obvious to everyone listening. An older woman in row 3, silver-haired 70, if she was a day, finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying. "He hasn't done anything." Diane turned toward her fast. "Ma'am, please, let us handle this." The woman didn't look away. "I'm watching you handle it." That was the frozen moment. The one where nobody moved, nobody spoke, and everything changed anyway. The cabin lights seemed too bright suddenly, catching every small crack forming in Diane's composure. Somewhere behind the curtain, a coffee cart wheel clicked once and went still, as if even the equipment understood it wasn't supposed to interrupt. At the aircraft door, gate agent Priya Nadan pressed 2 fingers to her headset, her face tightening as operations came through the line. "Yes, still on board. No, he hasn't been removed. No, security hasn't been called yet." That last word yet made Roland flinch. Marcus noticed. So did half the cabin. Harold, furious that the room's attention had drifted away from him, snapped, "This is insane. You're acting like this man owns the airline." "I don't," Marcus said, and reached slowly into his jacket for a slim black card case. He set it on the tray table without opening it. "Not yet. But I do own the fairness auditing system your airline is 3 signatures away from buying." The cabin went dead silent. Not restful silence, the silence of impact. Harold's color drained in patches, red bleeding into gray. Denise's mouth fell open. Diane stared at Marcus, as though his body had physically changed shape in that seat, though he had been exactly the same man the entire flight. That was the indictment, really. Not that he had power, but that they had needed proof of his power before they could see his humanity at all. Marcus opened the case slowly, and every eye in first class followed the motion. Matte black card, embossed silver lettering. Marcus Boone, founder and CEO, Bellwood Analytics. Roland Ashby's throat worked before any sound came out. He had seen that logo before, in internal briefing decks, a confidential memo marked urgent by Vantage's chief operating officer in the presentation slides for tomorrow's 9 a.m. Contract signing that half the airline's leadership had been rehearsing for weeks. Bellwood wasn't just another vendor. It was the company Vantage Air needed after 2 brutal years of viral complaint videos, a class action lawsuit over unequal boarding treatment, and a congressional letter demanding answers nobody at corporate wanted to write. And its CEO had been sitting quietly in seat 2A this entire time, while Diane Coleman tried to move him out of it for Harold Weller's comfort. "What is that supposed to prove?" Harold demanded, voice cracking at the edges. "Nothing," Marcus said. "My boarding pass already proved that. This just proves how badly you judged the man holding it." Roland forced his posture back into something resembling authority. "Mr. Boone, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." "No," Marcus said. "There was a decision." "A misunderstanding is fog. A decision has fingerprints." Diane stepped forward, desperate now to salvage something. "Sir, if I made you uncomfortable..." "That was never my intention." "You didn't make me uncomfortable," Marcus said. "You tried to make me removable." The young man in row 4 whispered "wow" under his breath, forgetting his phone was still rolling. Denise's confidence visibly drained out of her posture as she looked around and realized the entire cabin was no longer watching Marcus. They were watching her, watching Harold, watching the quiet machinery of privilege spark and grind in real time, in broad daylight 31,000 feet from the ground. At the front door, Priya's voice sharpened through her headset. Yes. Confirming. Marcus Boone, Bellwood Analytics. Confirmed. The color drained from Roland's face completely. Diane heard it too. The story had already left the aircraft, through a headset, into a radio, into an office where someone with a much bigger title was about to ask an unbearable question. What did our crew just do? Marcus lifted his phone and called Renata. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight because she never got calls from him mid-flight, unless something had already gone wrong. I need you to alert the board, he said. Vantage Air just created an incident on Flight 442, Seat 2A, multiple witnesses recording. What category? Renata asked, without hesitation, because she'd learned exactly how her boss's mind worked years ago. Marcus looked at Diane, at Roland, at Harold and Denise, rigid in their own seats now. Discriminatory service escalation, he said. Potential contract termination. 6 words. Clean. Corporate. Devastating. Diane's breath went shallow. She understood airline hierarchy well enough to know that a lost partnership could cost executives their bonuses, departments their budgets, and frontline staff, people exactly like her, their careers. He had believed she was protecting Vantage's most loyal customers. Instead, she may have just handed the airline's biggest weakness directly to the one man hired to expose it. Do you want legal looped in? Renata asked. Yes, Marcus said, but no public statement yet. I want facts first. He ended the call and set the phone face down on the armrest, the plain black surface catching the cabin light. Renata knew that gesture too. It wasn't revenge he wanted. It was evidence. Captain Louise Farron stepped out of the cockpit at that exact moment. 52 years old. Close-cropped gray hair. The composed economy of movement that comes from decades of making decisions under pressure. That had nothing to do with seating charts. She swept the cabin in one glance. Roland's stiff posture, Diane's pale face, Harold in the aisle, phones raised, a business card sitting open on a tray table like a live wire. She knew immediately this was not a normal passenger dispute. Mr. Ashby, she said, with me, now. Roland followed her, like a man being called into an office he'd never wanted to enter. Diane started to follow too. Captain Farron lifted one hand without even turning. Not yet. That small command cut deeper into Diane than any raised voice could have. The captain listened to the whispered version, then heard Priya's confirmation crackle through. Bellwood CEO, Seat 2A, and something in her jaw hardened into quiet, professional fury. She walked to row 2. Mr. Boone. I'm Captain Farron. I want to personally review exactly what happened here. I've been asking for that since the beginning, Marcus said. I understand, she said, and for a second, something like real regret moved across her face. Not enough to undo what had happened, but enough to prove she understood the size of the failure. She turned to the Wellers. Mr. and Mrs. Weller, take your assigned seats, 2C and 2D. Captain, with respect, Harold started. We've been loyal to this airline for 22 years. And today, Captain Farron said, her voice cold enough to frost glass, your assigned seats are 2C and 2D. Denise looked offended. You can't be serious. I am. 2 words. No room in them at all. Harold stared at her, waiting for the world to bend the way it always had. It didn't. He rose, stiff and furious, Denise's heels striking the carpet harder than necessary. Behind him, both of them stripped, for the first time in a long time, of the one thing they'd never had to live without, being told no in front of witnesses. Captain Farron turned to Diane next. Miss Coleman, forward galley. Now, Captain, I was only accommodating our loyalty members. No, Captain Farron said. You attempted to displace a confirmed passenger without cause. That is not accommodation. That is exactly what it looks like. Marcus spoke before Diane could answer. I refuse to be moved for prejudice wearing the uniform of procedure. That sentence landed like a closing argument. No one spoke. Not Harold, not Denise, not Diane, not Roland. Captain Farron studied Marcus a long moment, something heavy and institutional settling behind her professional calm. The particular shame that arrives when a system exposes itself through the ordinary decisions of ordinary people. Then we document it properly, she said. All of it. She ordered the forward cabin door left open, and the sound of the terminal drifted in. A cart rattling somewhere on the tarmac, a radio hissing, the mundane noise of a world that was now fully listening. Operations wanted written statements from everyone. Diane's head snapped up. Everyone. Priya, still at the door, met her eyes. Yes. The elderly woman from row 3 reached across the aisle toward Marcus. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner, she said quietly. You spoke when it mattered, Marcus told her. I should have spoken when it started, she said, and that truth sat in the cabin far longer than any apology would have. The cabin phone crackled. A new voice, older, male, tightly controlled. This is Gordon Aldrich, Senior Vice President of Customer Operations at Vantage Air. Put me through to Mr. Boone, please. Priya routed the call to the cabin speaker. Every passenger leaned toward it without moving an inch. Mr. Boone, on behalf of Vantage Air, I want to apologize for what happened today. Marcus looked toward the speaker, unmoved. What exactly are you apologizing for, Mr. Aldrich? The question froze the cabin, colder than anything Diane or Harold had managed all flight. On the other end, Gordon Aldrich breathed inaudibly, and everyone heard it. We apologize for the confusion around your seat assignment. There was no confusion, Marcus said. A pause. We apologize for how the situation was handled. Handled by whom? Marcus asked. Nobody breathed. Gordon understood. Finally, that vague language wasn't going to be enough. That this man had spent his career building software specifically to catch institutions doing exactly what Gordon was doing right now. We apologize, Gordon said slowly. That Vantage Air personnel attempted to move you from your confirmed first-class seat to accommodate another passenger's preference. And that the attempt escalated after your documentation had already confirmed your right to remain in 2A. A quiet, stunned murmur moved through the cabin. And why did that happen? Marcus asked. That was the blade. Not what. Why? Silence answered from the speaker. Captain Farron watched Marcus with something close to professional respect now. She had flown through engine warnings over the Rockies and a medical emergency above the Atlantic. But this was a different kind of pressure. No alarms, no smoke, just one man quietly forcing an airline to name its own malfunction out loud. That's what our investigation will determine, Gordon finally said. No, Marcus said. Your investigation will determine who participated. The why is already sitting in this cabin. He listed it plainly. Diane's assumption, Roland's escalation, Harold's certainty that comfort outranked a ticket, and every word struck harder than shouting ever could have, because none of it was shouted. That's not fair, Harold said weakly. Fair would have been sitting in 2C, Marcus said. Gordon's voice returned, stripped of its earlier polish. Mr. Boone, we'll launch an internal review immediately. Not enough, Marcus said. I want the passenger service logs preserved, crew tablet records, time-stamped communications, written statements from everyone involved, confirmation that no passenger who recorded or spoke up faces retaliation. And I want this reviewed by someone entirely outside your customer operations chain. Priya, still holding the door, gave the smallest nod. Every request Marcus had made closed a door where stories like this one usually vanished. We can preserve the records immediately, Gordon said. And the outside review? A pause. We'll escalate that to the executive committee. That sounds like a delay. It's process. No, Marcus said. Process is what you call delay when the people harmed are expected to wait quietly for it. He lifted his phone again, thumb over Renata's name. Bellwood's board reviews your final contract tomorrow at 9. Until an independent review is confirmed in writing, that review is suspended. The line went silent for what felt like a very long time. Mr. Boone, that partnership is strategically critical for both companies. Marcus looked out the window at the flat gray Carolina sky. No, he said softly. Integrity is strategically critical. The partnership was only ever paperwork. Give me 5 minutes, Gordon said. You have 3. Gordon Aldrich came back in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Nobody in that cabin had spoken a single word while they waited. The air felt thin, almost electric. Diane stood motionless in the galley, pale under the cabin lights. Roland kept his eyes on the floor, replaying every shortcut he'd taken to reach this exact moment. Harold stared at nothing. Denise held her handbag in her lap, like it might protect her from what was coming. Mr. Boone, Gordon said. The executive committee has approved an independent review, effective immediately. Written confirmation is being sent to your legal counsel now. All logs, records, and communications related to Flight 442 will be preserved. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Renata. Confirmation received. Board notified. Legal standing by. Thank you, he said simply, and the plain courtesy of it made Diane lower her eyes even further than the accusation had. She had braced for his anger. Anger she could have explained away in a report. His calm gave her nowhere at all to hide. Captain Farron stepped into the aisle. Miss Coleman, you're relieved from first-class service pending review. I've served this airline for 6 years, Diane whispered. Then you knew better, Captain Farron said, and the words landed with a quiet brutality no shouting could have matched. Roland asked, And me? You'll give your statement before we push back. Operations decides whether you stay on duty after that. He nodded once, looking smaller now, not broken, exposed. The way a man looks when the version of himself he'd built his whole career on turns out not to survive contact with the truth. A replacement attendant boarded a few minutes later, Angela Ferris, mid-50s, steady and unhurried. She approached Marcus first. Mr. Boone, I'm Angela. I'll be taking care of the cabin today. Water while we get settled? Yes, Marcus said. Thank you. No suspicion. No extra scrutiny. Just service. The ordinary thing that should have happened from the very first minute. The cabin slowly returned to motion. Bags were stowed. Seatbelts clicked. Phones lowered, though the footage had already left the aircraft. Already moving through timelines and inboxes and quiet living rooms, where people who had spent their own lives being underestimated would recognize this exact scene before the first sentence finished playing. Captain Farron paused beside Marcus one last time before the door closed. I can't undo what happened, she said. No, Marcus said, but you can make sure it doesn't disappear. I will, she said, and closed the door. Flight 442 pushed back late, but changed. 3 months later, Vantageur's independent review became public in a 12-page report that named names, timestamps, and a pattern going back 4 years. 11 prior complaints involving Diane Coleman alone, each one quietly settled. Each one buried before it ever reached a headline. Diane was terminated, not for a single mistake in one cabin, but for the pattern the review finally forced into daylight. And for the moment caught clean on video, when she'd looked at Marcus's boarding pass, seen the truth, and chosen comfort over it anyway. Roland Ashby was moved into a ground role with mandatory retraining. 6 months later, he asked, unprompted, to sit in on Bellwood's bias training sessions for airline staff, and told a reporter, plainly, that he'd made a decision that day based on nothing but the sound of 2 words, refusing and disruption, and that he was still ashamed of how easy that had been. Harold and Denise Weller quietly lost their Summit Circle status after a separate review of their usual arrangement turned up a pattern of its own. 17 documented incidents across 3 airlines, always the same shape, always someone else's ticket treated as an inconvenience to their comfort. Harold sent a written apology to Vantage's legal team, though notably never to Marcus directly, still framing the whole affair, even in writing, as an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a decision he had made. Some people, it turns out, will accept every consequence except the one word that would have actually cost them something. Sorry. The Bellwood Vantage partnership was signed 4 months late, with new language written directly into the contract. Real-time bias auditing on every customer service interaction, an independent passenger ombudsman with actual authority, and a public reporting requirement neither company could quietly walk back later. Marcus never gave an interview about it. He didn't need to. The footage had already done that work. On a Tuesday morning almost a year later, Renata found him in his office before sunrise, an old cracked leather Timex sitting on his desk beside a cup of coffee gone cold, the same watch, still ticking, still keeping the one kind of time nobody had ever managed to take from him. "You could have let it go," she said. "The partnership would have signed anyway, eventually." Marcus turned the watch over once in his hand before sliding it back onto his wrist. "My father used to say the world decides your worth before you walk into the room, if you let it," he said. "I stopped letting it a long time ago. I just don't tell everybody that's what I'm doing." He closed his laptop, picked up his satchel, same scuffed brown leather, same worn strap, and walked out to catch a 6 a.m. flight. Coach this time, no reason at all. Just because the window seat happened to be free. If this story reminded you that dignity should never depend on what someone else is comfortable seeing, hit like so. It reaches someone who needs to hear it today. Share it with anyone who's ever been asked to prove long they belong somewhere they already paid to be. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been in that cabin? On which side of the aisle were you standing? I read every single one.